Foolery Show, where two cynics desperately try to find a positive side to things. Today, we'll try to find the positive side to dying.
Yeah, because I don't want to die. Ever.
But I feel like dying is actually a good thing for the world, for everyone else. And I think the part of that, first of all, I'm not necessarily a fan of dying. But I think it's a good thing because it kind of resets the marker and kind of makes life worth living.
I think, on a macro level, it does make sense for there to be death, so there can be change and stuff in the world. I just personally, for me, dying's not for me.
But I feel like that's the best part of dying, if you will. Like, you actively don't want it, right? If there was something that was going to happen that you want, that it becomes like nervous anticipation, and it's like it's all good, right? Because like I feel like waiting for anticipation to get something good is kind of okay. Like delayed gratification is okay at some point, but it's the delayed that we're gonna die that makes you want to do interesting things, right?
Right, because
If
you're on
you,
a timer.
yeah, I feel like if there's no clock, if you're at a basketball game, there's no clock, then why don't I just walk down the court? Or why don't I just dance around a bit? Like, what's the point of doing all this in a time span if death isn't there?
Yeah, that's a good point. But, like, why so short of a timer then? Why don't we extend it longer? Push it down further down the road so we have more time.
Well, look, I mean, I think a lot of people argue, oh, I wish I could have more life or more life, but there has to be a balancing act. If you don't die or if you live too long, things will become very dull for you, but also for other people. Death kind of has that resetting aspect, right? Not only does it make you do interesting things, but it also, you can only do so many things. So you try and do the things that matter, right? And then it gets all reset because you die, whatever you've done comes out, and it'll be reinterpreted, messed up, everything. But you did the best you could.
Yeah, you have to be more deliberate about your decisions.
I mean, then what's the point, right? Let's say I was immortal. Let's say I'm doing whatever I want to do. Then, but why do I get up in the morning? Yeah, sure, maybe capitalism is still in effect, right? So I'm going to starve, but I'm not going to die. So really, it's just to make my life more comfortable.
Depends on your motivations, right? Like, let's say there's something that you really enjoy doing every day and you don't get tired of it. For example, there's like that sushi chef, Jiro, right? He's 90 years old. Oh, I'm looking, he might be almost 100 or maybe over 100 at this point. But he still is very dedicated to his craft. I feel like if you gave him more time, he would just keep going on perfecting his craft because that's what he enjoys doing. That's what he wants to do.
They're saying it'll be a negative thing for him to die, a negative thing for him to be no longer able to do the thing he loves doing so much.
I think that's part of it. And also, like, if he wasn't going to die, he wouldn't be bored of doing sushi. He would just continue doing it because he can't achieve perfection, but he's willing to dedicate his entire life to pursuing it, however long it takes.
But I think that's kind of an empty. That's an infinity like fallacy, right? Oh, I'm gonna dedicate my life to it. When you say you dedicate your life to something, you know that it's not gonna be forever. If you're immortal and you're never gonna die, then dedicating your life to something is entirely different.
I mean, I guess at some point you probably get tired of making sushi, I suppose, after
I
maybe
mean,
like a few hundred years or something.
right? That's what I'm saying, right? It's like you're playing with different numbers, right?
Right,
I
right.
remember
I
that
mean,
article a while back that humans really can only live about 140 years without like serious augmentation, right?
hmm.
So that's the most you're ever going to live. You ain't going to live more than that, and most people will die sooner than that. Um, but that makes you find something you really enjoy, right? I mean, the fact that he does that every day shows that he really enjoys it. For the time being, things come and go. Sometimes I'm into pizza. Sometimes I just want to move on, right? I used to be really into. I used to really be into eggs, eggs on toast. No, not really.
I mean, maybe he spends the first century of his life perfecting sushi, then he spends the second century of his life perfecting ramen, and he just keeps moving on. I guess maybe eventually he'll run out of things to do, but there's enough there if he choose to do it that it will keep him occupied for quite a long time. I mean, you can literally do whatever you want to do with that infinite amount of time, right? You can explore infinite hobbies, infinite interests, infinite walks of life, right? If you have the opportunity to do that. And so you can experience a whole wider gamut of humanity and life than you would in just one narrow lifespan.
One go.
Just one go, that's right. Now you get multiple save files, in a sense.
I think that's and that's great, right? Everyone wants to be able to do everything. You want to be able to live a life. I think that's built in, right? You don't want to miss out on anything good that happened, anything that was part of something. But I think that what makes life so valuable, right? When you have, I think it's the same thing as money, right? Like, let's say you have $20, that's all you've got. Each dollar becomes incredibly important, incredibly valuable to you. Mm-hmm. But if you had infinite money, something doesn't really matter that much. Like, you look at a lot of these super billionaires, you look at a lot of these CEOs, you actually find, I mean, everyone's like, oh man, they're just doing some sick stuff. Oh man, they're like, they could save the world. But I think if you actually look at them, they're actually really depressed because there's nothing more. Everyone wants to be them in a way, but it's like you've gotten to the top and there's nothing left. You can do everything, but you don't really want to do anything because it's ultimately dull. Money becomes dull. You start doing really dumb things because it doesn't matter to you anymore, right? Like, for example, if I worked, right, let's go back to the money example, right? Let's say I have $20 in my pocket and I work freaking a whole day of my life to make $20 so I can, I don't know, get some cheap food or something. Then I'm going to be like, holy crap, there's meaning. There becomes steps to it all. There's a path, there's a journey, there's excitement, there's a whole flux of things going. But when you're at the top and nothing can hurt you, nothing really matters anymore. It's kind of okay, whatever. And I think that's what makes life more valuable the shorter you have. In fact, I would say the shorter life is, the more valuable it becomes. Like, if you had cancer and you were going to die in a year, and let's say it was guaranteed, let's say there's nothing to do about it, you got bad, and I'm sure there are some people like that. Wouldn't that last year of your life become, the most valuable, the most interesting, because you have certainty and it's going to be over? Wouldn't that be better than saying living forever and not really caring it's just not important. The decision of what to do tomorrow is just not even important because you have so much.
I guess what you're saying is quality over quantity, essentially, right? The shortness of life makes you want to make it that much better. Whereas if you had infinite life, then you just don't care about what you do with your time because you have so much of it.
Yeah, and I would even go further to say that makes actual life important. So I think if you live forever, your life becomes not actually that important.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think even with our lifespans that we are now, like I think the average life expectancy is 70 to 80 years. It's kind of long, but it's also pretty short, I think most people would say. But then you would think most people would then spend a lot more time thinking about what they do with their time and what they do with their life. But I feel like a lot of people don't live their lives like that. They just go in a routine, they kind of just do things according to like in the moment, from moment to moment, and they don't really think about the grand scheme of how their life is playing out and what they're doing, why they're doing what they do. But like you said in your example, if you shorten the life down to like a few years, if you told someone, oh, you only have a few years left to live, all of a sudden I think people will then things come into focus. People start to think a lot more about, okay, well, how do I want to spend this amount of time? And what am I going to do in these years, and what really matters to me? So I feel like there's a certain range where all of a sudden people feel like they don't have that much time, but I feel like the normal lifespan is still not that much time. People just don't realize that it's a really short amount of time. So people don't really think about how valuable life is and how they spend their time.
Okay, then what is this optimum period of life that you're looking for? That there's some measurement that you're looking for? So I'm like, oh, if I lived 150 years, it's fine. Call it even. Or what I think that's kind of a hidden belief because no one wants to die, and so it's gonna keep nudging. What would you say?
Yeah, so I mean, we don't know what the optimal life is, right? Because people live until 70 to 80. They kind of, deteriorate over time. So your quality of life is not that good towards the end, anyways. So it's like, you're not as motivated to live if, your kind of quality of life diminishes. But let's say hypothetically, you were able to preserve your quality of life and your health and stuff and go beyond that, theoretical limit of 140 years. It's kind of impossible for us to say, well, okay, well, 200 years, 300 years, you get everything figured out, you experience everything there is, you get tired of everything. Maybe it's 400 or 500 years. Maybe it depends on the person. It's hard to say, but at the very least, if you can live forever, at least you have the option to end it whenever you want. At least it will be in your hands. You will get to make the choice. That's kind of why I'm on the side of living forever, because at the very least, if you really can't take it anymore at the end, you can exercise the option to go out.
So you would live forever, but not. You'd be immortal, but you could actually kill yourself at any point.
I would have the choice now. It's up to me now.
It's up to you now.
Yeah.
But then I feel like it just becomes who's. Then what does life become? Oh man, looks like I haven't killed myself today yet. I mean, granted, that's a law some people would say is what current life is about, anyways. So what's the difference between now or 200 years in the future or 1,000 years in the future? I feel like there's no difference. Like, sure, no one wants to die, but like, there's no difference from doing it now compared to later. I think. I mean, when we're young, I mean, there's so much time that you can do. Like, there's so much time. I think, yeah, a lot of people don't have a lot of time, and it sucks. But I think the far majority of people have plenty of time. And no one knows how much time it is. In fact, I mean, everyone, I think when you're young, in your teenage years, or when you're a kid, I remember at school, I was like, oh my God, gotta go to prom, gotta go to all these things. It's like, it's gonna be my life, da 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 da. It's only when you're older you realize that that's not true. You've actually got tons of time left. And in fact, your decisions you make that young actually affect the rest of your life. And that's why I'm not necessarily a fan of all the health deterioration as you get older. I don't think anyone is. But I'm a fan, I would say, of getting older and seeing that, I think getting older is there's no value. Let's say you could be, right? Let's say you could have that Greek, eternal youth, immortality, right? Let's give, for the sake of argument. Then there's no real value to youth, right? Because you're just permanently useful. Older people want to be young because they knew what youth is. And it kind of gives a whole different variety of life. Each stage of life, your experience changes. Sure, you can't do the things you used to do, but maybe you do different things now. Life has changed. Life continues to be interesting. If you had that constant immortality youth, then I think life gets dull pretty quick. I mean, yes, you could. Yes, could you find new hobbies? New hobbies forever? Well, maybe you could. But it just adds less value. Are you just trying to keep living? Are you desperately trying to stay sane? Or are you just trying to avoid the inevitable? Right? You're not really living at all, I would say. You're just trying to pass the time. Right? What is a hobby really even? Right? There are some people that truly enjoy doing something. But why is it important to have a hobby in the first place? Why are these such a big things? Because people need to find a way to pass the time.
Philosophical perspective, I mean, from a physiological perspective, we're always going to be looking for that next dopamine hit. We're always chemically driven, in a sense, to do things that give us pleasure, that engage us, that stimulate us. So as long as we have those biological drivers that keep us going, I feel like day to day, you'll still be searching for those things. Let's say you enjoy reading, right? There's literally multiple lifetimes worth of books that you can read. And do you people ever really get tired of reading? I don't know. Like, there's so many books you can read. I don't know if you ever get tired necessarily of the act of reading itself.
Well, I'm
So
sure there'll be new things to read. I'm sure the life will change. I'm sure of that. That I can be sure. But I think that it will get dull in that, you look at history. Look at history, for example. History repeats itself, right? It just it keeps cycling. So eventually you're going to read the same thing. Maybe in a different format, maybe in a different language, maybe in a different way, but it's the same thing. And I feel that you begin to understand how the world works as you get older, and the reason why the world works the way it is. So I feel like it becomes less interesting the longer you live. You just begin to understand these things, and that I think that is something that when I was young I hated with a fierce passion, because I'm like, why can't I understand that now? But it's just a time game. Right? The longer you live, the more you know, the more you realize that there's a reason for these things. It's not just some massive government conspiracy that everything is happening the way it is because someone is controlling all the strings. There's also a human aspect to it too. Someone got greedy, someone had a bad time, someone really wanted to go to Hawaii for some reason. And because they're going to die soon, or they felt that you only live once, and that kind of drives people to do these things. I think without that, if you lose that, then all the flair, all the interesting things go away very quickly.
yeah, about the history repeating itself, like, yes, history cycles, but I'm sure there are also a lot of things that happen in history or will happen in history that we can have no comprehension of today, right? Like, we can make yeses and conjectures of what history is going to look like 1,000 years from now, but we can never accurately predict that or come even close to that, right? Like 1,000 years ago, humans in the year 1000, they could have never possibly conceived of what life would be like today. So if you do live forever and you go through history, things will inevitably change. Maybe something parts about humanity will be cyclic and will, disappoint you and depress you. But there are also other things like technology and the internet and culture and stuff that will continue to progress and innovate and will surprise you, I think. One thing that I'm really curious about is whether humanity will ever make it to interstellar travel. Are we actually going to make it there, or are we going to wipe out ourselves and go extinct? What is the human story actually going to be like? Are we going to end, or are we going to continue on for a much longer period of time? Are we ever going to figure out where the universe comes from? What are inside black holes and things like that? These are questions that may be answered in time, but probably unlikely to be answered within our lifetimes. And so if you can live forever, potentially, assuming humanity makes it that far, you will be able to learn more and more about these things and these questions that are so fascinating and seem unanswerable today. So that's one of the reasons why I would want to live forever, just for the sake of knowing like what's going to happen next.
Interesting. But I think I would argue that the reason you have this fascination, I really do want to see if humanity makes it to stars, is because you may never make it there. What's the whole interesting thing about the future is you don't know if you'll make it. You don't know if you'll be there. You don't know these things. And that terrifies you and interests you because it's like, well, I don't know. And I think that's what makes your current life interesting. Because if you don't make it, then if you really wanted to achieve something, you have to leave something behind. You have to not only exist in the moment, have your own happiness, have enough dopamine hits, as you say it, but also achieve what you want to happen. Right? It's like having, it's like being able to curate something forever. If you could curate something forever, then it'd be forever like that. But the fact that you won't be there forever it makes it more interesting. How are you going to do it? You're not going to be there forever, so how are you going to make this happen? If you always had a guiding hand there, if you had a piece of clay and you're molding the clay and you're always there, then the clay will always be molded how you want. But the fact that you're not going to be there makes it, and now you have to think, I have to train these people, or I have to, all these connections, or, it adds a whole new ballpark to it. It has a whole new flair. Spice of life, I would call it. And that, I think, ultimately makes life worth living, worth dying for, almost. it brings a value to death. Now, when I die, I know that I've done this. It brings justification. I mean, I feel like humans, we flip flop back and forth between okay, I'm okay with dying, and no, I really don't want to die, because it's like, oh, I've done something, but then okay, well, I still have more to do. I want to find more to do, but I think that having kind of a time cap limits to what you could do. So be as good as you can in this small period of time, forces us forward, and pushes us to be as good as we can be now. And I think without dying, then I think life becomes very stale and becomes very pointless. There's no real point to it all. I mean, one could argue that life is kind of pointless as a whole, but dying drives that point. Well, maybe my point of life was to make make people stop drinking bad water, right? And if I'm immortal, then figure it out eventually. We'll get to space eventually. But now that if I die, and it's not as important, or I'm sorry, I mean, if I die, then it becomes way more important. I don't want to have freaking dirty water for the rest of my life. I'm going to figure this out now. The fact that I want to do things now is a purely death-based thing. There's no, why do anything now? Why care about anything now? Why care about global warming? Why care about anything? Like, why this doesn't, everything becomes irrelevant. Death is what brings a meaning.
There's a flip side to that, though, right? Because let's say you're going to have dirty water and you live forever. Well, now you're going to have dirty water for forever. So you could argue even more motivated to solve that problem. Or why, or living forever will also force you to take the longer view of things, right? Because now you are going to be here hundreds of years in the future when you have to actually suffer the effects of global warming and climate change. You actually have to suffer those consequences and live through those times. So that would actually motivate you even more to want to fix these kind of issues. A lot of people are very short-sighted because they're like, well, I'm not going to be here in a couple of generations when the fish get overfarmed and climate change is terrible and the ice caps completely melt. So, why should I care about that? I'm just going to focus on being greedy and make money now, and I'll live my life, and I don't have to worry about any of those consequences.
But I would also compound that saying, okay, I agree with you, right? You have people die soon. It's not my problem. I'm going to die soon. But then if you can't die, then why do you care?
Well, because you have to live here. You have to experience those effects. Unless you're in like a little bunker or a little piece of paradise somehow you forged on Earth. Like you have to live. I assume you would want to live in society and civilization and travel around the Earth, and you would have to live with the state of the Earth as it is.
But you wouldn't necessarily be afraid of these things, right? Yeah, sure. Maybe you don't like it hot, and maybe global warming is a bad thing because it's going to be hot, right? But okay, so what, right? Like it just becomes indifferent. Yeah. So you're saying if I could live forever, then I would want my environment as pristine as possible because I want to live the best I could.
Right.
But I mean, why? I'm saying that the whole reason that is even a thing is because people die. If that was never even a thing, like if people never died, then the whole point of living a better life is kind of whatever. It's certainly an improvement, but I would say it's driven from I don't want to do this when I get older. I don't, like why do you want to live a better life? Why is that even important? Better. What does that even mean? Better. I want to live a healthier life. Well, okay. If you live forever, that's irrelevant. Right? If you want to live a more interesting life, well, you'll have everything eventually. So it's whatever. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want other people to live worse. I mean, that's maybe it. But then, if you live forever, people become like pets, right? Because you live forever, they don't, so they're kind of irrelevant. Their opinion is pretty irrelevant. Okay, and so everything starts to fade away. Coming from someone that's going to die, The life of an immortal seems interesting. But I'm saying the flip would be basically an immortal's life almost is pointless. There's no point, it's not interesting, all I want to do is actually die. The death in itself makes the meaning.
Well, I guess it's where you draw the line, I suppose.
But isn't that always how it is? Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, and let us know what we should talk about next.